I genuinely appreciate being here. So from someone who started from where I did, this is a pretty big deal. I just wanted to share some observations and have a conversation with you. So the thing I want more than anything else is when I get to my last slide to be able to engage you guys and hopefully have a conversation about some of what I'm sharing. If that doesn't happen, I'll be pretty disappointed. Anything other than that, and I'm good with it. Thanks to Jez and thanks to Vicky for allowing me to kind of bring this. Special thanks to Tony because he has been phenomenal to kind of help prop me up to get ready. I had a couple of observations because when I started pulling this presentation together, I can tell you I was pretty nervous, not only about, kind of standing in a foreign environment and talking to people you don't know, but touching on a topic that I think can be pretty polarizing, but I've had a few things that kind of help me be more confident throughout the day. So Jez this morning talked about your business is your brand and you don't have a brand without purpose. And what I'm going to show you is all about my personal purpose, and I hope that that comes through. Peter talked about doing good and just getting it done. I'm also going to talk a bit about that, so I hope that comes through. Kara talked about change and speaking up and being the leader. Hopefully that comes through. And Jeff talked about making it better. And if nothing else, this is all about making it better. Where do I not stand? Okay, I won't move. So this is really all about my observations on this journey, what I've seen and what I've learned, and how I reapply them on a day-to-day basis. I grew up in LA, but not that LA. I grew up in Lower Alabama, which is really the middle of nowhere, right? I was raised on a red dirt farm by my grandparents. It is nothing like anything you've ever seen before, but it's absolutely everything that I have come to love, because this is where I started to learn the tenets of what has carried me this far. Hard work was required. It was not optional, and you woke up every day and you did it, right? We had about 30 acres. It was a self-sufficient farm, and if you didn't work hard, you were hungry. Determination, which you could argue is pretty much the same as hard work. You just had to get through it. No matter what you were doing, you had to drive to get to the completion of your goal, and when you got to the end of that goal, there would be another one waiting on you. So no matter how much work you got done, there was always more work to do. And church, I'm one of those dudes, right? I grew up in the church. It was hellfire and brimstone. It was Southern Baptist, but you learned what it meant to give and what it meant to receive, and you learned how those things were reciprocal, and you could not have one without the other. So in a nutshell, you work hard and you live right, right? And I challenge any of you to take me to task on that because I'm trying to do the best damn job I can. I learned to grow in South Alabama, right? I learned to grow in terms of how I thought on a farm. And I believe that the things I learned to do on that farm are the same principles I use today in how I approach my business, how I approach my team, and some of the things I'm going to share. So, right, 30-acre farm, raised by my grandparents. It was a lot of work. It was hard work. We raised a lot of things. So we had a few cows, you had some chickens, we had pigs, we grew sugarcane and corn and soybeans, right? And in doing those things, there were a few principles that were always consistent no matter where you were from a seasonal standpoint. You study the seasons. Every season there is something different you need to be doing. There is something to finish, there is something to start, there is something to prepare for. You have to be fully aware of your environment, what that environment does for you, and what you need to do for that environment. You have to rotate your crops. You cannot plant the same thing in the same soil and expect it to continue to produce year after year. It does not work that way. Different things take different things from the ground and put different things back in it. If you continue to do the same thing over and over again, you will find yourself at a loss pretty quickly. Nurture versus nature. Not only is your job when you're on the farm to take care of the things around you, take care of the horses, put them up, shoe them, take care of the cows, make sure they're all there, take care of the chickens, feed them so that they feed you, but you also have to take care of the people, right? You have to look out for each other. You have to nurture them as much as you nurture everything else on the farm, because it cannot be done individually. You cannot run a farm as a single person. I tell you, it is damn near impossible, right? Row. So now, there's always something to fix, right? So this goes back to there's always more work to do. So whether it be breakfast or fences, there's always something to fix, right? So whenever you get done with one thing, you move on to the other. And one of the hardest conversations I ever had with my grandfather who raised me was nothing worth doing is easy. Nothing. If it's worth your time, it's probably going to require a lot of effort, but you'll get the payout at the end of the day. So these are the tenets, right? This is what I learned, and this is what we use to operate on a daily basis on that little farm in Monroeville, Alabama. And it's been a pretty crazy journey for me, right? But throughout that journey, these same tenets have been able to help me in many different ways. As I've gone from here, right, as a little redhead black boy in South Alabama, to going to one of the best design schools in the country, and then coming to Cincinnati, all the while having to use those principles in different ways. And now I'm going to compel you to help me think about how we can continue to work together to use them still. Because now we're not just trying to grow a brand. We're not just trying to grow a company. We're not just trying to grow revenues. But I would argue we can use these same tenets for how we grow the industry. Design today has a critical place in the world of business. So we've heard a number of speakers this morning already talk about what design has helped contribute to their businesses, how design has helped their businesses to grow, maybe what their businesses would be like without design. And I would argue that the brands that you love the most are probably those brands that are best designed. Nobody likes the brand that has no emotional connection. Nobody loves the brand that's not aesthetically pleasing. It's why you pay 10 times more for an Apple PC than you do for a Windows PC. It's just a better design. And design is in high demand, right? Which is a great problem to have if you're a designer. Because design is the salt that makes business palatable, right? If you are that thing that everybody wants, it's a great place to be. But I would argue that it's not so great all the time for everybody, and probably not so great for most of our businesses. Because we also have a pretty fundamental problem, one that is conspicuously obvious if we take a step and look at what's going on. There's a significant gap in the people we serve and the people we are. So I ask you to stop, right? Look around the room and ask yourself, does the place you work, do the teams you work on represent the composition of the city that you live in? Right? So look around the room and ask yourself, does this look like where I live? Does it look like where I went to school? Right? Or better yet, does it match the consumer you're trying to serve? This might be an even more relevant question. How do we design for a consumer that we don't know? I'm not saying you can't, but I'm saying it's exponentially more difficult if you're not equipped for it. If you don't have the right tools, if you don't have the right training, if you don't have the right insights, delivering for your consumer, delivering for your customer, delivering for your client becomes exponentially more difficult. So this is where I go, maybe I did come to give you a sermon, right? But hopefully it becomes a two-way sermon. Because I think that we can start to change and compel the people around us to change the industry. This conference is about growth. This conversation, I hope, becomes about growth. because I think there's an opportunity for us all to accelerate what we've seen in the case studies and conversations that we've heard this morning, and that we'll continue to have this afternoon. Because change within the design industry is long overdue. So a little bit of data, right? Because I operate in a business world, I figured a few data points will help drive this home for you. The US Census Bureau says essentially in the next 20 to 30 years, the demographic population of the United States will change. So the people that you know today as the minority will be the majority. Right? Now that might not be a surprise for most of you, right? Certainly not a surprise for me. If you listen to the television and the kind of the discourse that's happening in this election, you know that that's going on, right? But it's going to go from its current rate of 34% to more than 50% in about the same amount of time that I've been in Cincinnati. The counterpoint that I would offer you, that I would argue is probably less known to you and has been less visible, is that the US Department of Labor says that there are roughly 1 million designers practicing in the industry. It might be a few more, but there's 1 million folks practicing design. And of that 1 million designers, a whopping 3.5% are black and a whopping 12% are Latino. Right? So that's 15% collectively of a group that probably compromises in the last census roughly 30% of the US. That I would say is a bit of a problem. But why? Right? Why is that a problem? It's a problem because not only is design not a diverse industry, it's a problem because our rates of diversity within the industry are going down, while the rate of diversity in minority population in this country is going up. So if we are a group of individuals and companies that serve the general population, how do we serve them if we cannot empathize with them, if we do not understand them? But there's a bit more to the story, right? So I was able to do a bit of digging, and I'll offer just what I found in a few scientific studies on the value of diversity in the workplace, right? And if anybody wants the specific studies, hit me up, I'll send them to you. They're not the best thing to read, right? So I ask you to take my word for it for now. The first is the more diverse your work group, the more people of color, of ethnic background, of sexual orientation, of age that you have in a working group, the more innovative the thinking in that group. Scientifically proven. I found another study that said, from a business standpoint, right, comparison across multiple similar groups, the profitability of a business goes up given the more diversity that is in the work groups, right? So for business owners, for business leaders, that's a pretty compelling statistic, that you can actually make more money if you have a more diverse workforce. And then lastly, the more diversity you have in your group, the more likely you are to be able to think discontinuously, to break paradigms, because you've exposed the people in that group to different ways of thought and thinking. It makes perfect sense if you think about it, right? But it's kind of like common sense. Not everybody's thinking about it, and not everybody has it. And so you have to ask yourself, if your group, if your team is delivering kick-ass creative today, how much better could that creative be if you better diversified the team that had to lead that creative? If you better diversified the pool of designers that had to deliver that work every day, how much better could that work be? Or maybe a more provocative question is, how much better off are you going to be if your competitor figures it out first? Where do you stand if Landor and LPK figure out how to develop a more diverse work team and can better deliver what their consumers and clients need? Then what? And I'm not arguing that the answer is simple, because it's not. It's fairly complex, right? But it's not something that we can't figure out. And I would compel you that the same lessons that led me on that little farm in South Alabama, right, can help us figure out how to solve this problem as well. Study the seasons. What season are we in? What do we need to be doing? What have we just finished? What do we need to prepare for, right? Because to whom much is given, much is required. You cannot reap a robust harvest if you do not first plant the seed. But to plant a seed, you have to know what season you're in. Rotate your crops, right? Whether that means moving people around within the office, changing where you recruit, working with different firms. There are a number of different ways that we can do the same thing that I did on that farm that we can do in industry. But how do we think about it? Nurture your work. Nature and nurture. So take the time to get to know the people around you, right? Because the diversity that lies within each one of us may not be blatantly obvious. But if we don't know the people we work with, then we can't reap the rewards that comes from working with diverse people. But you also have to nurture that person who may be obviously different than everybody else, right? So as a redhead, freckle-faced black man who's almost always been different, right? I can tell you that I have not always been welcome. But there are times where someone reaches out to you, speaks to you, talks to you, that does make a difference. So are we nurturing this change in the work environments that we have every day? There's always something to fix, right? I would say that this is our problem to fix. Because we are the leaders within this community. We've now heard this message, and now we're compelled to do something with it. But lastly, nothing worth doing is easy. So I don't think for a moment that this is something that we can figure out in a year's time. I don't think for a moment that it's going to be complete and finished in the next 3 to 5 years. But I do think that it can get done, but that is not easy. That's it.
Okay, I'm here with the roving mic. Questions for Tyson. Oh, okay, Jez, you get to be first since you're closest. I'll come back to you if you want. Finish your Skittles. Finish your Skittles. Who was back here at a question?
So you talked about how important it was to really get to know the people around you. How do you do that in such a big company like P&G?
I believe even at P&G, you don't work with the company in its entirety, right? I firmly believe that any successes that you have, anything that you have, the prospect of what you're able to achieve is based on your personal relationships with the people around you, right? I've been working for P&G for 20 years. I've been able to somehow survive in that environment for 20 years, but I would argue that it's all because of relationships, right? In a company that size, I would argue that it's more important to formulate individual single relationships because you never know where you're going to have to go. You never know who you're going to have to call on, who's going to have to help you. My current president today, as of, for the last 18 months, was one of my first marketing directors I worked with in the company 20 years ago, right? So the ability to form a relationship with that person early on served me well. 20 years later, when I went to go work for her, and she just kind of went, yeah, I know you, go do what you do, right? That's because of relationship. So I think no matter where you are, no matter what you do, no matter what you're trying to get done, everything is built on individual relationships.
Another question? Back here.
Hi. Speaking with the percentage of people of color in the design field, I've taught at UC since 2000 off and on. I've worked at Landor, I've worked at FRCH, and I think your numbers are spot on. And the thing is, in the graphic design program, I was talking to a professor about this last week, actually. I don't know why it hasn't changed. It's basically the same numbers of people of color in the program since 2000. And do you have any insight to that or ways that we can recruit?
I'm more than happy to speak to it, right? And I'll try to give you a couple of different answers, and this is purely kind of the world according to Tyson, right? And I'm debating on whether I want to name somebody here, right? And I will, because I also think it's important for us to hold people accountable. The people who do great work, I think we need to reward them and say that they're doing great work. The people who are not doing great work, I think we need to help them and support them to try to get them to do great work. And I think I'll share two perspectives with you. One is you cannot look at this problem in isolation, right? Anything, you need to understand what the entire story is. So similar to how the Chobani story talked about the differences in palette and the difference in stretch and how you stretch the brand and what's the context of where people use it, right? I would argue, and we won't go very deep here, right? Consider the history of black people in this country. You have to. You cannot talk about the educational state without talking about the history of black people in this country. Now try to bring that to current day. The state of Ohio has an education system that has been ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court of the United States, but it still hasn't changed. The reason that's important is that then means that our school systems are funded by real estate taxes, which then means you're going to have gross disparities in the nature of the school systems. I've been very fortunate in terms of the schools and opportunities that I've had, and I think I've tried to make the most of them. But if we aren't able to attack and tackle some of those problems, we won't be able to deal with this issue, not as a whole. The reason that makes a difference is, I would argue that the reason most black kids don't sign up to go to design school and don't sign up to go to art school is either one, they don't know that these opportunities even exist, or two, they're being told that they're not legitimate career paths, right? So even if you had a student, so this is where I go to, I've had a conversation with Robert Probst about this. We've talked about it a number of times. I've sat in his office. I put the culpability on Robert first and now on me, right? Because Robert said to me, Tyson, when the black kids come to UC, they choose to go to the College of Nursing, the College of Engineering, they choose to try to go to med school, they want to go to law school. They don't want to come to DAP. And my argument back to Robert is, because they don't know that DAP is here, on one hand, or given the history of this country, if you're a first-generation college student in 2016, and your grandmother or mother or uncle or mentor is telling you how to choose your major, then what's the likelihood they're going to tell you to go major in design that they know nothing about versus trying to be a lawyer, doctor, accountant, or physician? Like, it's just, there's no comparison. So my charge to Robert was, if you have not walked out of your office and across the street from the university to a high school that is 98% black and had a conversation with the students in that school about the opportunities that you have within DAP, and you're not talking to the guidance counselors and asking them to go find those students who excel in art or who are somehow distracted and try to introduce them to what careers in design could look like, when you have one of the top-rated design schools, fashion schools, industrial design schools, and urban planning schools at one of the best rates per dollar, right? So what's it cost to go to UC this year? Less than 20 grand, I'm pretty sure, right? It will cost you 40 grand to go to MICA, and I'm pretty sure that I individually could come up with enough money to pay for one kid to go to school for 1 year. If you help that kid understand that that's an opportunity. So, I mean, it's not a very simple solution, but it's one that we're working on, right? So I think it's twofold. One is kids don't know that this is a career opportunity. And if they don't know, we can't recruit them, right? So this as a journey started for me because I was asked to help recruit for P&G. And I was sent to UC, and my message to Robert was, I will not continue to come here if you don't have the kids that help me meet the quotas that I need to meet for my company. I'm going to go to wherever those kids are. It's one less stop that I've got to make, right? But after you go to enough schools, you figure out how pervasive the problem is, and then you can either throw up your hands and go, I'm done, and I can't do it, or you can say, I can work to try to fix it. But this is where, there's always work to do, right? Always. And so my job now is to try to fix it. And I told my team earlier, I only have a couple of soapbox speeches, right? This is one of them. Right? So when somebody asks me to speak, it's just a question of whether or not I can turn the soapbox to fit the theme that they want me to meet.
I am done with my skittles, and of course the question that I was going to ask was just pretty much asked there, which was, so you said there's 1 million designers. The question is whether or not the composition across that million matches the country, and from what I can hear from your previous 5 minutes of Yes, soapboxing. That's not the case. So how do we really change it? Because you can complain to the universities, and we can complain that we can't find the right people from the universities, and everyone can point the finger at somebody else. But sooner or later, someone has to change things, right? Because I agree. When I look at our work, the best work that we do around the world is where you get multiple offices working together. So you get Chinese people working with South American people, or Australian people working with German people, and great stuff comes out of that. So we can artificially create that through our network. But what you're asking for is, how do we change it
There's
locally?
systematic change that needs to happen, right? So I think there's a couple different things that I've had to challenge for myself, and I've had to challenge in people that I'm around. One is, how do we set the right targets? What's the right number? How many people do we need? What's the right percentage, right? And you'll have to figure it out for your own organization. For P&G, we set our targets based on the availability at the school. So that means if UC only has 1% in their design school, that's our target. I call bullshit on that, right? Because I'm like, you can't set the target based on somebody else's arbitrary numbers. Like, that doesn't make it right. The other piece is then, how do you get the kids into the school so that you can recruit them, right? That's the thing that we're trying to work on, right? So that's where I've been able to kind of pull some more people into the shallows with me to start to try to help some of that, right? To say, how do we then move kids, how do we get kids exposure to be aware? How do we get them into schools to really be able to study so that we can then recruit? Because I believe that if you get the kid to be aware, that kid goes on to practice professionally and then comes to work for me, that he's probably more likely to go back and kind of keep the cycle going. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So I mean, we've set up some systems. So it's a great thing when all of your worlds come together, right? So my professional world and my personal world, when it comes to where my commitments are, overlap significantly. One of the places that I volunteer and serve on the board is at Elements, which is an inner city arts center. For those of you at Interbrand, I think Tony just shared with many of you last week or a week ago kind of what that organization is about. Right, so we've started to set up a system whereby through a program called Creative Futures, we're introducing those children who are urban core kids to what careers within the, call it, broader design industry could look like, whether that's graphic design or lighting design or video design, to try to help spark some interest, and you can start to kind of help matriculate and move those kids through a system to get them into school. But I think it also requires a partnership from the business community, and it requires a partnership from the educational community, because, and this is where I'll really throw Robert under the bus. I mean, this was totally like a blueprint. Hey, come get on board with me. I need some help, right? So I went to my boss, Phil Duncan, at P&G, and said, Phil, I want you to give me 50 grand a year, right? More money than any of us could come out of pocket to give. Not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, but enough to be significant. I want to go create a visual arts program at Elements. No real commitment as to what it was going to be, but I said I believe it's important because we need to generate interest in visual arts and design as a way to kind of create a pipeline. He said, done, 5-year commitment, right? The next step was to go to UC and say, Robert Probst, Blues at Marshall, you have DAP camp, right? Which is a residential 1-week high school camp where kids come in and get exposed to every program within DAP. I want to reserve 2 seats in that program every summer, and I'll pay you for them. I'll pay you for them. But they have to be reserved for minority students. And you get to choose them. I'm not going to bring them to you. Like, I'll tell you that I've got this pool of kids over here, and you can come and look at them, or you can go find them somewhere else. I don't care, right? Because I don't want to get in the middle of whether or not, kind of, am I calling the shots? Am I giving you money and telling you who it is, right? But what I wanted on the back end was for UC to put, after, so we do that program for 5 years, which would give us ample opportunity to help those kids understand not only do you have to have an interest, and not only do you need to start developing a certain amount of mastery, but you got to get your grades right. okay? If you want to go do, so that gave me 5 years to do that. And at the end of that 5 years, I want UC DAP to put one chair in each class for 5 years. The class already exists. I want one chair. Robert wanted me to go endow the chair. He wanted me to go raise the money to pay for a chair that he could give for free. That's where we fell out. I'm like, I don't agree with that. Because you could get, like if I'm paying you anyway, I'm recruiting from your school, I'm pulling your kids through, I'm coming back to contribute, people are coming back to give, I'm paying for DAP camp, and you can't give me something that you have already for free. That's when I say, I don't need UC, because I've got Micah, and I've got NKU, and I've got Mount St. Joe, and I've got SAA, and I've got everybody else, who I'm sure of all of those schools, somebody would gladly step up and say, I could do that, right? And my hope is as we get this ball rolling, that more and more people will want to be involved, whether it is to teach or to give or to compel their alma mater, that they ought to be a part of this.
I'm just going to have one quick follow-up if I can, because I don't want to dominate the mic. I don't know if, now you can hear me. There's kind of two questions that come off the back of it. Maybe one's an observation, I'm not sure. Talent and targets is always something that I've always struggled with, and I know lots of companies do as well. At the moment, there seems to be a desire to fill quotas, but we have to, and you have to, make sure that you still maintain the highest levels of talent, because that's something that's important to all of us. So that's kind of one thing. The second thing, I think, goes much deeper, which is to do with your point about, if it comes down to it, they're going to go and be a lawyer or a doctor or something like that. And I think there's a massive re-education job. I'm involved in something called the Creative Industries Federation in the UK, which is trying to do just this, to remind the whole economy, frankly, that creativity is a massive driver of success and differentiation for our economy in the UK, and of course here in the US and everywhere else, frankly. China are spending billions of dollars to build creative capability. So are Japan. They're all kind of catching on. So how do we get it into the kids of the youngsters when they are 5 years old and they really might set their life like you did to be a designer?
Yeah, I think there's still a huge awareness gap, right? So, for the designers in the room, how many of your mothers or parents still actually know what you do, right? Really. So, I think there's this thing of, so how do you encourage somebody to go do something and they don't know what you do? I literally just had a conversation with someone this week about, as a father of 12, 13, and 18-year-old daughters, right? The cost of college education, right? Because I'm about to mortgage my life to make sure that my daughters can go to school. And we had a whole conversation about the likelihood that you could get a job if you graduated with an accounting degree versus what's the ROI? No matter where you go to school, what's the ROI on that degree, right? And on the drive home, I came to the conclusion that I actually think that I am better prepared to go work anywhere because I was taught to think creatively and to problem solve. And given the opportunity, I think I could probably survive in almost any environment, better so than an accountant could in any environment. So, I think it's just a matter of, okay, but what's the value, right? So what's the value of that education? And I think it's up to us as individuals not only to be able to help others understand that value, but also to make sure that we're giving that value when we show up, right? So I often find myself in a room of MBAs and PhDs, right? And you feel way outranked. But you have to understand that you're in the room for a reason. And what do you contribute? And how do you make sure that you're raising the return on the trust that design has been given? If you're going to be the salt, then be the salt. Nobody's expecting you to operate the way, the finance guy does, or the way the marketing guy does, or the way the research guy does. But you have value, and it's up to us to add that value. I think that the other question you had was targets versus talent. I would never stand here and advocate that anybody lower their expectations for what capability and what caliber of talent they recruit. I won't. I've got a great high-performing team, right? I am a minority on that team. I'm the only man. But I try to do the best that I can do every day I show up, right? And I think with a little bit of diligence, we can find the right target with the right talent. Does that mean you hold up your shop? I don't think so, right? Because we all have work to do. But I think we have to always have open minds and open eyes to find those talents and make sure that we're nurturing them. I'm pretty sure that somebody at some point gave me a chance, either because of who I was related to or what I looked like or how I spoke, right? But then once you get in the door, we still got to deliver. And I would never expect any, like, I have a high standard, which, you know, I tell my team, my biggest fault is I give a damn, right? It's my biggest fault. I give a damn. And when you give a damn, you set a high bar, and it's hard for people to cross that bar. But I don't think that you've got to lower the bar. And I think whenever you show up in the room, you've got to appreciate that somebody gave you a shot, and you got to clear the bar. Wherever that bar is, you've got to clear the bar. And I would argue more so as a creative, you've got to clear the bar.
Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate it.